The old veteran had been standing in silence for nearly 20 minutes, his weathered hands carefully polishing the bronze nameplate beneath his younger brother's memorial. Visitors walked past without paying much attention. Some stopped long enough to read the inscription before quietly moving on. Others simply admired the rows of white marble and continued toward the museum entrance. The morning was peaceful, until a convoy of luxury SUVs rolled onto the memorial grounds. Within moments, event organizers flooded the plaza with ladders, lighting equipment, banners, and temporary fencing. At the center of it all was billionaire developer Victor Langford, the primary sponsor of that year's National Heroes Foundation Gala. He glanced toward the memorial with obvious impatience. "We're behind schedule," he said. "Move that display." An assistant hesitated. "Sir, that's the permanent Fallen Brothers Memorial." Victor frowned. "I don't care what it's called. I paid for this event. I want the stage exactly there." The elderly veteran slowly looked up. "So, where am I supposed to honor my brother?" Victor barely looked at him. "You can come back tomorrow." The plaza fell silent. Before anyone could respond, two workers stepped toward the memorial carrying equipment cases. One reached for the folded ceremonial battle flag, resting beside the bronze plaque. A calm voice immediately broke the silence. "Please step away." Everyone turned. Standing at the edge of the memorial walkway was a black tomb guard in full ceremonial uniform. His expression never changed. His posture remained perfectly still. But the authority in his voice stopped every movement around the plaza. Even the wind seemed to disappear. His name was Marcus Ellison. For nearly 11 years, Marcus had guarded the nation's most sacred military memorials. He had stood through blazing summers, freezing winters, pouring rain, and silent funerals. He had buried heroes, comforted grieving families without speaking a word, and honored promises made by soldiers who never came home. He was there to argue. He was there to intimidate anyone. He was there for one purpose alone: to ensure that honor was never treated as something that could be moved, purchased, or negotiated. What happened over the next few hours would change the lives of everyone standing in that plaza, including one billionaire who believed money could buy authority over everything. But before we continue, if stories about honor, justice, and ordinary heroes standing up for what is right inspire you, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and share where you're watching from in the comments. Now let's go back to the morning, when one simple order threatened to turn a place of remembrance into nothing more than another corporate event, and why Marcus Ellison refused to take a single step backward. Marcus Ellison did not repeat himself. He simply stood between the workers and the memorial, his polished shoes perfectly aligned with the stone pathway leading to the bronze monument. For several long seconds, nobody moved. The workers looked toward Victor Langford, unsure whose order carried more weight. Victor sighed impatiently. "Officer," he said with a forced smile, "this isn't a security issue." Marcus answered calmly. It became one the moment someone attempted to remove ceremonial property from a protected memorial. Victor folded his arms. "You misunderstand. We're improving the event. There will be senators here." Television crews. Veterans organizations. This ceremony deserves a better stage. Marcus looked toward the memorial. The stage already exists. Victor followed his gaze. All he saw was a weathered bronze wall engraved with hundreds of names, fresh flowers placed by grieving families, and a folded battle flag resting beside photographs of young soldiers who never returned home. To Marcus, however, every item represented someone's final memory. Every photograph carried a family that still waited for impossible reunions. Every flower had been placed by hands that still remembered birthdays, voices, and promises. Nothing here was decoration. Everything here was sacred. Across the plaza, visitors had quietly stopped walking. Some instinctively sensed something important was unfolding. Others simply noticed the unusual sight of a tomb guard standing motionless before a group of event organizers. An elderly couple removed their hats. Several veterans exchanged worried glances. No one wanted to interrupt. Marcus finally spoke again. This memorial remains open to Gold Star families throughout today's ceremony. They have the right to visit at any moment. Victor shook his head. They can use the west entrance. We'll reopen this section after the gala. No one loses anything. Marcus answered almost immediately. They lose time, Victor frowned. What does that even mean? Marcus's eyes remained fixed on the memorial. A mother visiting her son's name for 10 minutes does not receive those 10 minutes back. A widow who travels across the country cannot postpone her grief because today's schedule became inconvenient. The words settled over the crowd. No anger. No accusation. Just quiet truth. For the first time that morning, even Victor's assistants looked uncomfortable. People often assumed Marcus had always been fearless. The perfectly pressed uniform, the disciplined posture, the calm expression that never seemed to change. They imagined someone born for ceremonial duty. The truth was very different. Marcus grew up in one of Baltimore's poorest neighborhoods. Violence was unusual. Gunshots at night were. Broken homes were common. His father worked double shifts repairing city buses before joining the Army Reserve. His mother cleaned office buildings long after midnight. Neither had much money, but both believed something more valuable could still be passed to their son. Respect, responsibility, and keeping one's word. Marcus remembered being 12 years old when his father took him to a small veterans cemetery on Memorial Day. Rows of white headstones stretched farther than he could see. He asked why strangers left flowers for people they had never met. His father answered with words Marcus never forgot. One day, son, you will understand. We don't honor them because they knew us. We honor them because we enjoy tomorrow only because they gave up theirs. Years later, Marcus enlisted. Not because he dreamed of medals. Not because he wanted adventure. He enlisted because service felt like the natural continuation of everything his parents had taught him. Military life changed him. It stripped away pride. It demanded discipline. It taught him that leadership often meant remaining calm while everyone else panicked. After completing active duty, Marcus was selected for ceremonial service. The training nearly defeated him. Every movement had to be exact, every step measured, every salute identical. There was no room for shortcuts. Instructors constantly reminded their recruits of one simple principle. The uniform is never about you. You disappear, the honor remains. Marcus embraced those words. Years later, visitors would often compliment his composure. They never realized that calm had been earned through thousands of hours of discipline. Nor did they know how many funerals he had witnessed, how many folded flags he had handed to broken families, how many children had asked him questions no soldier ever wanted to hear. Did my daddy suffer? Will mommy stop crying? Can heroes come home? Marcus rarely spoke during ceremonies. But every question stayed with him. Every family became part of the invisible weight he carried. That was why today's confrontation felt different. Victor Langford saw logistics. Marcus saw families. Victor saw event planning. Marcus saw unfinished grief. Those two worlds could never understand each other. Not until something forced them to. The elderly woman who had been quietly polishing the bronze nameplate finally stood. Her knees trembled slightly as she leaned on a wooden cane, polished smooth by decades of use. Marcus immediately recognized her. Evelyn Brooks. She had visited the memorial every July for nearly 15 years. Always alone. Always carrying the same small leather satchel. Inside it were only three things: a faded photograph, a Purple Heart, and a handwritten journal wrapped carefully inside a blue cloth. Her late husband, Captain Thomas Brooks, had never returned from combat. His younger brother, Michael Brooks, whose name rested on the memorial before them, had died only 6 months later during a rescue mission. Evelyn had lost both men within a single year. Yet she never allowed bitterness to replace gratitude. Each visit followed exactly the same routine. She cleaned the bronze plaque herself, placed fresh white lilies beneath the names, read one page from Thomas's final journal, then sat quietly for several minutes before leaving. Marcus had watched this ritual for years. Neither of them needed many words. Respect had created its own language. Evelyn slowly approached Victor. Her voice was soft. "I've been coming here since this memorial opened. My grandson is serving overseas now. He asked me to tell his grandfather that he's keeping the family promise." She gently touched the folded battle flag. "This isn't simply cloth. It carries memories my family can never replace." Victor looked at his watch. "I truly am sorry for your loss, but we have contracts, television schedules, hundreds of guests arriving. We'll return everything exactly where it belongs." Evelyn smiled sadly. "Young man, you can return objects. You cannot return a moment that has been disrespected." Around them, more visitors had gathered. Some quietly recorded with their phones. Others simply listened. Marcus remained silent, because he knew something important. The real battle had never been about moving a memorial. It was about whether a nation still understood the difference between value and price. And the hardest part of that lesson had not even begun. Victor Langford had spent his entire career believing that every problem could be solved with authority. If authority failed, money usually succeeded. If money failed, someone higher in the organization would simply make the decision for him. That philosophy had built a business empire worth billions. It had also convinced him that rules existed mainly for people, without influence. He looked around the plaza. Nearly 200 guests would arrive within an hour. Television crews were already unloading equipment. A military orchestra was rehearsing near the main entrance. Every delay cost money. Every minute threatened months of preparation. Victor turned toward his event manager. "How long until the stage is ready?" "At least 45 minutes, sir." "If the memorial stays where it is," Victor sighed. "I don't intend to lose 45 minutes. He walked directly toward Marcus. "You've made your point, but this ceremony belongs to the Foundation today," Marcus answered quietly. "The ceremony belongs to those whose names are carved into that wall," Victor smiled. "No, it belongs to the people paying for it." Several veterans standing nearby exchanged uncomfortable looks. One of them lowered his head. Another quietly removed the Foundation's guest badge from around his neck. Victor didn't notice. His attention remained fixed on Marcus. "I've donated over $50 million to military charities. I've built hospitals, scholarship programs, veterans housing. I've earned the right to decide how today's event is organized." Marcus nodded respectfully. "Your generosity has helped many people." Victor looked almost satisfied. Then Marcus finished. "But generosity does not purchase ownership of sacrifice." The word struck harder than either man expected. Nobody applauded. Nobody spoke. The silence itself became Victor's first defeat. Still unwilling to back down, he pulled out his phone. "Call the museum director. I want this resolved immediately." While Victor waited for the call to connect, his production crew continued preparing the stage. Large lighting towers rolled closer to the memorial. Heavy speaker cabinets were stacked beside fresh wreaths, left earlier that morning by military families. Marcus watched every movement carefully. He was searching for conflict. He was protecting boundaries. An impatient stage supervisor approached. "We're just moving a few flowers. We'll put them back." Marcus stepped forward. "No," the supervisor frowned. "They are flowers." Marcus looked at the fresh white lilies. "They were placed less than an hour ago. A mother brought them. They remain exactly where she left them." The supervisor laughed softly. "You actually remember who placed every bouquet?" Marcus answered without hesitation. "I remember every family." The man's smile disappeared. Across the plaza, Evelyn quietly closed her husband's journal. She could feel the atmosphere changing. This was no longer a disagreement about event planning. It had become a conflict between memory and convenience. A television cameraman noticed the growing crowd. Without instruction, he aimed his camera toward Marcus. Soon another reporter followed. Then another. Visitors began whispering. "Who's the soldier? Why won't he let them move the memorial? What happened?" Victor finally ended his phone call. "The director is on his way." He looked toward Marcus with obvious confidence. "I suggest you reconsider." Marcus remained motionless. "I already have." Victor stepped closer. "You realize you're delaying a national event?" Marcus answered calmly. "No, I'm preventing one from losing its meaning." The sentence spread through the crowd almost instantly. Several people quietly nodded. Even workers hired for the event began slowing down. Nobody wanted to become the person remembered for disturbing a military memorial. For the first time that morning, Victor realized he was no longer controlling the narrative. The plaza that had been nearly empty less than an hour earlier was now filled with spectators. Some had planned to attend the gala. Others were tourists. Many were veterans who had simply come to pay their respects. Now everyone stood watching two men who never raised their voices. The tension felt heavier because neither of them seemed willing to leave. Marcus stood exactly where he had begun. His breathing remained steady. His hands never moved. His discipline itself had become a silent statement. Victor, however, could feel control slipping away. Every additional phone recording increased the pressure. Every whisper among the crowd weakened his position. His communications director hurried toward him. "Sir, this is already appearing online." Victor frowned. "What are they saying?" She hesitated. "They are asking why a sponsor is trying to relocate part of the memorial." Victor's expression hardened. "That's ridiculous. We're improving the ceremony." Before she could answer, another voice interrupted. It belonged to an elderly Marine, wearing a row of faded campaign ribbons. He stepped out of the crowd and stopped several feet from Marcus. Without saying a word, the Marine removed his cap. Then he stood quietly facing the memorial. A few seconds later, another veteran joined him. Then another. Within minutes, nearly 30 former service members were standing in respectful silence beside the walkway. Nobody chanted. Nobody protested. Nobody argued. Their silence carried more weight than shouting ever could. Visitors instinctively stopped talking. Even children sensed something important was happening. Victor looked around in disbelief. "What is this?" No one answered. Because everyone understood. The veterans were not standing behind Marcus. They were standing behind the principles he represented. Across the plaza, Evelyn slowly wiped away a tear. She had lived long enough to know that true respect rarely announced itself with loud speeches. It revealed itself through quiet choices. Marcus finally looked toward Victor again. His voice remained calm. "This memorial has never belonged to one family. It belongs to every family that sacrificed someone they loved." Victor opened his mouth to respond. But before he could speak, one of his impatient assistants attempted to solve the problem himself. Without asking permission, the young man walked directly toward the memorial. He reached for the folded ceremonial battle flag. Marcus's eyes followed the movement. The entire crowd seemed to stop breathing. No one knew it yet. But the next few seconds would change everything. Part 9, the line, "No one should have crossed 900 words." The young assistant never saw Marcus move. 1 second, his hand was reaching toward the folded battle flag. The next, Marcus was standing between him and the memorial. He hadn't grabbed the man. He hadn't pushed him. He simply placed one white-gloved hand firmly over the edge of the wooden display case, blocking access to the flag. His voice remained steady. "Do not touch it." Their assistant froze. Victor stepped forward immediately. Marcus, enough. He's only moving it 2 feet. Marcus never looked away from the flag. It will not be moved. Victor's patience disappeared. You don't have the authority to stop this. Marcus slowly turned. I have the authority to protect what has been entrusted to my care. Victor laughed bitterly. Entrusted, it's a ceremony. It's a piece of cloth. Several people in the crowd gasped. An elderly widow quietly covered her mouth. A retired army colonel closed his eyes. Marcus answered with absolute calm. No, it is a national symbol presented to families whose loved ones never came home. It represents sacrifice. It represents promises. And today, it represents this family. He nodded toward Evelyn. Victor folded his arms. I've attended dozens of military events. Flags are folded, moved, stored, displayed. This one is no different. Marcus took one slow step closer. This flag is different, Victor frowned. Why? Marcus looked at Evelyn before answering. Because it has not yet finished serving its purpose. The plaza fell silent. Evelyn slowly opened the blue cloth inside her leather satchel. She carefully removed an old Purple Heart and laid it beside the folded flag. My husband carried this. My brother-in-law carried the same flag before it was presented to me. My grandson asked me to place both here before he deployed overseas. She looked directly at Victor. He wanted 3 generations of our family connected before he left. You are asking me to interrupt that promise. Victor's expression shifted slightly. For the first time, he seemed unsure. Then one of his executives whispered into his ear. The press is live. Victor glanced toward the cameras. Dozens of lenses were now pointed directly at him. Instead of backing down, pride took over. He pointed toward the workers. Move everything now. No one moved. The workers stared at Marcus. Then at the veterans. Then back at Victor. One quietly lowered his equipment cart. Another stepped backward. Finally, the youngest worker removed his company badge and placed it in his pocket. I'm sorry, sir, I can't do this. Within seconds, every worker stepped away from the memorial. Victor found himself standing alone. The sound of approaching vehicles echoed across the memorial grounds. Museum security arrived first. Then members of the Board of Trustees. Finally, Museum Director Alina Pierce stepped out of a black sedan. She immediately sensed the tension. What happened? Victor answered before anyone else could speak. This guard is preventing an authorized event. We're losing valuable time. Director Pierce didn't respond immediately. Instead, she walked toward Marcus. Sergeant Ellison, Marcus saluted. She returned the salute. Report. Marcus calmly explained every event from the beginning. No exaggeration. No emotion. Only facts. When he finished, Director Pierce turned toward the memorial. She noticed the flowers. The Purple Heart. The folded flag. Then she looked toward Evelyn. Mrs. Brooks, I was told you would be here this morning. Evelyn smiled softly. I've never missed July 12th. The director nodded. I know. She turned back toward Victor. Did anyone explain whose memorial this is? Victor answered confidently. It's a permanent installation. Exactly. She walked toward the bronze wall. Every item placed here by surviving families is protected under federal memorial preservation regulations. She looked directly at Victor. It cannot be relocated for commercial convenience. Victor blinked. Commercial. This is a charity event. Director Pierce's voice remained calm. The purpose may be charitable. The sponsorship is commercial. The distinction matters. Victor's legal advisor suddenly stepped beside him. He quietly whispered something. Victor's face lost its confidence. Director Pierce continued. Sergeant Ellison acted exactly as he was trained. He protected the memorial, he protected the families, and he protected this institution. She paused. Which means? She turned toward Marcus. You have my full support. The veteran standing nearby quietly nodded. Some smiled. Others simply straightened their posture. Marcus never smiled. He merely answered, "Thank you, ma'am." Director Pierce then faced the crowd. I apologize to every family present today. This memorial will remain exactly as it is. A wave of quiet relief spread through the plaza. But Marcus knew the story still wasn't over. Not yet. Victor stood motionless. His carefully planned event had collapsed before it had even begun. Television cameras continued recording. Guests whispered among themselves. Board members avoided eye contact. For the first time in years, Victor had no speech prepared. No contract to reference. No authority left to exercise. Then Evelyn slowly walked toward Marcus. She carried Thomas Brooks' worn leather journal in both hands. There is something you should all know. The plaza became silent once more. She opened the journal too, a page protected by fragile plastic. Inside was an old photograph. Two young soldiers stood shoulder to shoulder beside a damaged military truck. Director Pierce leaned closer. So young, Evelyn nodded. The man on the left is my husband. She pointed to the second soldier. And the man beside him, she looked toward Marcus, was his closest friend. Marcus lowered his eyes. My father. A murmur swept across the crowd. Evelyn smiled through tears. During an ambush overseas, my husband carried your wounded father nearly half a mile under enemy fire. He refused to leave him behind. Marcus spoke quietly. My father survived because of him. He lived long enough to raise me. Evelyn nodded. Before he passed away, he made me promise something. If we ever met the family of the man he saved, we would tell them that no debt of honor should ever be forgot. Marcus reached into the inside pocket of his ceremonial coat. He removed a folded letter. The paper was yellow with age. My father wrote this before he died. He handed it to Evelyn. She unfolded it carefully. Her hands trembled. The first line read, "Every day my son guards those who cannot guard themselves. I know I have spent the life your husband gave me wisely." Evelyn could no longer hold back her tears. Neither could many people watching. Even several reporters quietly lowered their cameras. Marcus looked toward the memorial. I didn't stand here today because of regulations. I stood here because my father taught me that gratitude must become action. If someone gave your family another chance at life, you spend the rest of your own protecting what they believed in. No one applauded. No one spoke. Instead, one by one, veterans, families, museum staff, visitors, even members of Victor's own event team turned toward the memorial and stood silently at attention. For nearly 2 full minutes, the entire plaza remained completely still. There was no music, no speeches, no cameras flashing, only silence, the kind of silence earned by sacrifice. Victor slowly removed the foundation badge from his jacket. He walked toward Evelyn, then toward Marcus. Without being asked, he bowed his head. "I'm sorry. I came here believing I was funding remembrance, but I forgot that remembrance cannot be managed like a business." Evelyn accepted his apology with quiet dignity. Marcus simply nodded, because for him, victory had never been about defeating a man. It had always been about protecting a promise. And on that quiet July morning, honor had remained exactly where it belonged. The assistant's fingers were only inches from the folded battle flag when Marcus moved. He did not rush. He did not shout. He took one precise step forward and placed himself between the young man and the memorial. The movement was so controlled that, for a moment, the assistant did not understand what had happened. Then he looked up. Marcus was standing directly in front of him. His shoulders were square. His white-gloved hands rested at his sides. His expression remained calm. But there was something in his eyes that made their assistant immediately pull his hand back. "Step away from the memorial," Marcus said. His voice was not loud. It did not need to be. The words traveled across the silent plaza with the weight of an order given during a military ceremony. The assistant glanced toward Victor. Victor's face had turned red. "What are you doing?" he demanded. The young man hesitated. "Mr. Langford, I was only trying to. I know what you were trying to do." Victor pointed toward the memorial. "Move the flag." Their assistant did not obey. Victor stared at him in disbelief. Then he turned toward Marcus. "You are interfering with an authorized operation." Marcus remained still. "The memorial is not part of your operation." Victor stepped closer. "I am the primary sponsor of this event. I have writ approval to use this plaza," Marcus answered calmly. "You have permission to hold an event near the memorial. You do not have permission to disturb it." Victor laughed without humor. "You expect me to believe that a folded flag cannot be moved several feet." Marcus looked toward the flag. Beside it rested Evelyn's lilies, the Purple Heart, and the leather journal that had survived more than 5 decades. "It can be physically moved," Marcus said. "But that does not mean you have the right to move it." Victor's communications director stepped forward. "Sir, perhaps we should pause." Victor ignored her. He pointed toward the growing crowd. "Do you understand what you're causing? News crews are recording this. Guests are arriving. Millions of people may see a military representative obstructing a national charity event." Marcus looked toward the cameras, then back at Victor. "If millions of people are watching, then we should be especially careful about what we teach them." A murmur passed through the crowd. Victor's jaw tightened. "And what exactly do you think you're teaching them?" Marcus answered without hesitation. That gratitude without respect is only performance. The words landed like a blow. Several guests lowered their eyes. A veteran in the front row slowly nodded. Victor looked around as if searching for someone who would support him. No one did. The assistant who had reached for the flag stepped backward and joined the other workers. Victor noticed. "You work for me," he said. Their assistant swallowed. "Yes, sir, then follow my instruction." The young man looked toward Evelyn. She stood beside the memorial, with one hand resting on her cane. Her eyes were filled with pain, but she refused to look away. The assistant removed his event badge. "I'm sorry, sir, I won't touch it." The plaza became even quieter. Victor stared at the badge in the young man's hand. "You understand that you're fired?" The assistant nodded. "Yes, sir." He placed the badge on a nearby equipment case and walked away from the memorial. That single act changed the atmosphere. Until that moment, the workers had behaved as though they had no choice. Now they understood that obedience was still a decision. One by one, they stopped working. A lighting technician switched off a power unit. Two stagehands lowered a metal frame they had been preparing to carry across the plaza. A sound engineer stepped away from the speaker cabinets positioned beside the wreaths. Victor turned slowly, watching his production crew abandon the task. "What do you think you're doing?" No one answered. The elderly Marine standing near Marcus finally spoke. "They are remembering what this place is." Victor faced him. "This event supports veterans." The Marine removed his sunglasses. "No, this event advertises that you support veterans. There's a difference." Several people in the crowd murmured their agreement. Victor's face hardened. He turned back toward Marcus. "You planned this." Marcus's expression did not change. "I did not ask anyone to stop working. You didn't have to." Victor gestured toward the uniform. "You stand there looking righteous, and everyone assumes you're the only person who cares." Marcus took a slow breath. "This is not about how I look." Victor glanced at the cameras. "Of course it is. You know exactly what you're doing." The accusation hung in the air. Some people shifted uncomfortably. Marcus understood the implication. Victor was suggesting that Marcus had used his uniform, his position, and the growing attention to embarrass him publicly. But Marcus refused to take the bait. He had faced anger before. He had faced grieving fathers who needed someone to blame. He had faced commanders under pressure and strangers who mistook discipline for arrogance. He knew that once emotion controlled him, the meaning of his actions could be distorted. So he lowered his voice rather than raising it. "I am doing what I was assigned to do. Protect this memorial, protect the objects entrusted to it, and protect the dignity of every family represented here." Victor looked toward Evelyn. "Mrs. Brooks, I have already apologized for the inconvenience. We will return everything after the gala." Evelyn shook her head. "You keep calling grief an inconvenience." "I did not say that. You didn't have to." Victor looked frustrated. "We are honoring your husband and every man named on that wall." Evelyn's fingers tightened around her cane. "Then why are you asking us to disappear so your guests can see the stage?" Victor had no immediate response. The cameras captured every second of his silence. Then the sound of sirens approached from beyond the museum gates. Museum security vehicles entered first. Behind them came two black sedans carrying senior administrators and members of the memorial board. Victor straightened his jacket. His confidence returned almost instantly. "Good," he said. "Now this ends." Marcus did not move. Evelyn remained beside the flag. The veterans continued standing in silence. Victor walked toward the arriving vehicles as if victory had finally arrived. But when the rear door of the first sedan opened, the person who stepped onto the plaza was not someone he could easily control. Museum Director Alina Pierce looked toward the unfinished stage, then toward the crowd. Finally, her eyes settled on Marcus standing before the memorial. Her expression became serious. "Sergeant Ellison," she said. "Report." Marcus saluted. And for the first time that morning, Victor Langford realized that the man he had dismissed as a ceremonial guard might possess far more authority than he had imagined. Marcus delivered his report exactly as he had been trained. He did not describe Victor as arrogant. He did not mention the insults. He did not accuse anyone of disrespect. He provided only the facts. The production team had attempted to place equipment inside the protected memorial boundary. Workers had been instructed to relocate flowers and ceremonial objects. An assistant had attempted to handle a folded battle flag without authorization. Marcus had ordered the individual to step away. No physical force had been used. No property had been damaged. Director Pierce listened without interrupting. Beside her stood Colonel Robert Hayes, chairman of the museum's Military Advisory Council. He was in his late 60s, with silver hair and a posture that revealed decades of service. When Marcus finished, Colonel Hayes turned toward Victor. "Is Sergeant Ellison's report accurate?" Victor crossed his arms. "It's technically accurate, but it leaves out important context." "What context?" "We are preparing for one of the largest military charity broadcasts in the country. This event will raise millions of dollars. We needed to adjust the stage by less than 15 feet. Colonel Hayes looked toward the memorial. "And the adjustment required moving family tributes temporarily. The battle flag temporarily. The Purple Heart." Victor hesitated. "I wasn't aware of the medal until a few minutes ago." Evelyn spoke from beside the wall. "You were aware of me." Everyone turned toward her. "You saw an old woman standing beside this memorial. You heard me explain why I came. And you still ordered your people to remove everything." Victor exhaled. "Mrs. Brooks, I was under enormous pressure." Colonel Hayes's eyes narrowed. "So were the men whose names are on that wall." Victor looked at him. "With respect, Colonel, that is not a fair comparison." "No," Hayes answered. "It isn't. They performed under pressure without asking families to sacrifice their dignity for a television schedule." Victor's legal advisor stepped forward. "Perhaps we should review the event agreement before making any public conclusions." Director Pierce nodded. "I already have." She held up a tablet. The foundation received access to the Eastern Plaza and the auditorium. The memorial zone was specifically excluded. Victor looked toward his advisor. "That cannot be right." Their advisor avoided his eyes. Director Pierce continued. Section 14 prohibits moving, covering, repositioning, or incorporating memorial objects into commercial staging. She looked directly at Victor. Your team violated that section the moment equipment crossed the brass boundary line. Victor glanced down. A thin brass strip ran through the stone beneath his shoes. He had stepped over it without noticing. Marcus had not. Director Pierce pointed toward the ground. Sergeant Ellison was positioned inside the protected zone. He was not interfering with your event. Your event was interfering with the memorial. Whispers spread through the plaza. Victor's confidence began to disappear. He looked toward that television crews. Can we discuss this privately? Director Pierce followed his gaze. This became public when your employees were instructed to remove a Gold Star family's tribute in front of witnesses. Victor lowered his voice. I have donated more money to this institution than anyone standing here. Director Pierce's expression remained professional. We are grateful for every legitimate contribution, but this museum does not sell authority over the dead. The statement silenced even the reporters. Victor stepped closer to her. Think carefully. If you humiliate me in front of the press, my company can withdraw every dollar of future support. Director Pierce looked toward the memorial. Then toward Evelyn. Finally, she faced Victor. If support requires us to surrender our purpose, it is not support. Victor's legal advisor closed his eyes. He knew the conversation had reached the point of no return. Victor, however, refused to surrender. You think another sponsor will replace us? Do you know how much this institution depends on my foundation? Before Director Pierce could answer, a voice came from the crowd. Our organization will replace today's catering costs. A woman wearing the badge of a National Veterans Association stepped forward. Another man raised his hand. Our company will cover the auditorium rental. Then the elderly Marine spoke. My chapter will pay for transportation for every Gold Star family attending today. More voices followed. A local construction company offered labor. A retired officer offered temporary staging. A military family charity offered to replace the event staff. Within minutes, the support Victor had threat to remove was being replaced by strangers standing throughout the plaza. No one had organized it. No one had asked them. They simply refused to allow the memorial to be held hostage by one man's money. Victor watched in disbelief. Marcus remained silent. This was not his victory. It belonged to the people who had chosen principle over convenience. Colonel Hayes turned toward the production equipment. Remove the stage materials from the memorial boundary. This time, the workers obeyed immediately. They rolled the lighting towers backward. They carried the speaker cabinets toward the auditorium entrance. They lifted the temporary fencing and reopened the walkway. As their equipment disappeared, the bronze wall became visible again. Morning sunlight reflected across the engraved names. Evelyn stepped forward and adjusted the white lilies beneath Michael Brooks's inscription. Marcus watched her hands tremble. He wanted to help, but he understood that this small ritual belonged to her. Director Pierce approached Marcus. You followed procedure exactly. Marcus nodded. Yes, ma'am, she lowered her voice. You also prevented this institution from making a mistake it might never have recovered from. Marcus looked toward the wall. I only protected what was already here. Director Pierce followed his gaze. Sometimes that is the hardest duty. Victor remained several feet away. His communications director handed him a phone. He looked at the screen. The confrontation was already being broadcast across social media. Short clips showed him calling the flag a piece of cloth. Another showed Evelyn asking why her grief had to disappear for his guests. A third showed Marcus standing silently while the workers refused to touch the memorial. The comments were multiplying by the second. Victor's board members were calling. Sponsors were requesting explanations. A national veterans organization had announced it was reviewing its relationship with his foundation. For the first time that morning, Victor no longer looked angry. He looked afraid. Not because he had lost control of the stage. Because he had lost control of how the world saw him. He approached Marcus slowly. Are you satisfied now? Marcus turned toward him. This was never about my satisfaction. Victor gestured toward the cameras. My reputation may be destroyed, Marcus answered quietly. I did not tell you to cross the boundary. I did not tell you to ignore Mrs. Brooks, and I did not tell you to call that flag a piece of cloth. Victor's face tightened. So this is punishment? No, Marcus looked toward the names on the wall. This is consequence. Victor stared at him for several seconds. Then he turned toward Evelyn. She was opening the old leather journal. Her expression had softened, but her pain had not disappeared. Victor walked toward her. The crowd watched closely. He stopped several feet away. Mrs. Brooks, and she looked up. I owe you an apology. Evelyn closed the journal. Victor struggled to continue. He had given speeches to thousands of people. He had negotiated billion-dollar contracts. Yet the words he needed now seemed impossible to produce. I believed funding this event gave me the right to control it. I was wrong. Evelyn waited. Victor looked toward the folded flag. I treated something sacred as an obstacle, and I treated your memories as though they could be rescheduled. His voice became quieter. I'm sorry. Evelyn studied him carefully. I accept your apology. Relief crossed Victor's face. Then she continued. But accepting an apology does not erase responsibility. Victor nodded slowly. I understand. Colonel Hayes stepped forward. The museum board will conduct a formal review of the foundation's sponsorship agreement. Victor did not protest. Director Pierce added, today's event will continue, but your company branding will be removed from the Memorial Plaza. The production team immediately began lowering banners bearing Victor's name. Each one came down in complete silence. The irony was impossible to ignore. The man who had tried to move the memorial for his logo was now watching his logo removed so the memorial could remain. As the final banner was carried away, Evelyn turned toward Marcus. Sergeant Ellison, may I show you something? Marcus stepped closer. She opened the leather journal to a page marked by a faded ribbon. A small black and white photograph was tucked inside. Two soldiers stood beside a damaged transport vehicle. One was Evelyn's husband, Thomas. The other man was younger, thin, and smiling despite the bandage around his shoulder. Marcus stopped breathing for a moment. He recognized the face immediately. "My father," Evelyn nodded. The crowd became silent again. "Thomas carried him out after their convoy was attacked. My husband wrote that your father kept telling him to leave him behind, but Thomas refused." Marcus looked down at the photograph. His father had rarely spoken about their attack. He had only said that another soldier gave him a life he had not expected to keep. Evelyn turned the journal toward Marcus. Beneath the photograph, Thomas had written one sentence. Marcus read it silently. Then Evelyn read it aloud. "A soldier is never truly gone while someone still protects the promise he died keeping." Marcus closed his eyes. For years, he had believed he was simply performing his duty. Now he understood that his path had begun long before he joined the military. His father had survived because Thomas Brooks refused to leave him. Marcus had grown up because another man had carried his wounded father through gunfire. Every birthday, every meal with his family, every lesson his father taught him, every step Marcus later took as a tomb guard, had been made possible by the man whose medal and journal he had protected that morning. Evelyn placed the photograph in Marcus's gloved hand. "Your father visited me once after Thomas died. He promised that our families would always remember each other." Marcus's voice almost broke. "He kept that promise," Evelyn smiled. "So did you." Marcus looked toward the bronze wall. For the first time that morning, the discipline in his face gave way to visible emotion. Not weakness. Not grief alone. Recognition. He had not protected a stranger's memorial. He had protected the memory of the man who had made his own life possible. Marcus stood at attention before Evelyn. Then he raised his hand in a slow, perfect salute. Evelyn placed one hand over her heart. Around them, every veteran followed Marcus's example. Then the museum staff, the workers, the visitors, even Victor. Hundreds of people turned toward the memorial and stood in silence. The planned gala had not yet begun. But the most meaningful ceremony of the day was already taking place. There were no stage lights, no company banners, no prepared speeches, only a grieving widow, a soldier repaying a debt he had carried without knowing it, and a wall of names reminding everyone present that honor did not belong to the wealthiest person in the plaza. It belonged to those willing to protect it. The silence at the memorial lasted nearly 3 minutes. No one checked a phone. No one adjusted a camera. No one worried about the delayed schedule. For those 3 minutes, the plaza belonged entirely to the men and women whose names were carved into the bronze wall. When Marcus finally lowered his salute, the crowd slowly followed. Evelyn carefully returned the photograph to the journal. She wrapped the Purple Heart in the blue cloth and placed it beside the folded battle flag. Nothing had been moved. Nothing had been hidden. The memorial remained exactly as her grandson had asked her to leave it. Director Pierce stepped toward the waiting reporters. Her voice was calm, but there was no uncertainty in it. Today's remembrance ceremony will proceed inside the main auditorium. The Fallen Brothers Memorial will remain open to military families and the public throughout the day. She paused. The museum also confirms that the Langford Foundation's actions this morning violated the conditions of its sponsorship agreement. Victor looked toward his legal advisor. The man lowered his eyes. Director Pierce continued. Effective immediately. All Langford corporate branding will be removed from the memorial grounds. The Foundation's future relationship with this institution will be reviewed by the Board of Trustees. A reporter raised her hand. Director Pierce, does that mean the sponsorship has been terminated? The board will make its final decision after reviewing the full record. Colonel Hayes stepped forward. But until then, Mr. Langford will have no operational authority over any museum event. The word spread through the plaza. Victor's control was gone. Not reduced. Gone. His communications director checked her phone. Her face became pale. Sir, Victor turned toward her. What? She lowered her voice, but the microphones nearby still captured part of the conversation. 3 corporate partners have suspended their support of the Foundation. Victor stared at her. Which partners? She named them. Each organization had spent years building relationships with veterans and military families. None wanted its reputation connected to what had happened that morning. Another assistant hurried over. The National Veterans Alliance just released a statement. Victor's jaw tightened. What does it say? Their assistant read from the phone. They are requesting a formal investigation into how donations to your foundation are used during sponsored events. Victor's expression changed. Until that moment, he had believed the damage was mostly public embarrassment. Now he understood that the consequences could reach the organization he had spent decades building. He looked toward Marcus. You've destroyed everything, Marcus answered quietly. No, sir, Victor's eyes hardened. Do not lecture me. Marcus remained respectful. I did not remove your sponsorship. I did not release the recordings. I did not order your partners to withdraw. Victor stepped closer. You stood in front of those cameras and made me look like a monster. Marcus shook his head. I stood in front of a memorial. What people saw was determined by what you chose to do there. Victor looked away. The sentence was impossible to argue with. Around the plaza, workers continued removing corporate displays. A giant banner bearing Victor's portrait was lowered from the museum entrance. His company's logo disappeared from the press backdrop. Luxury reception tables were rolled away from the memorial walkway. Each removal revealed more of the original space. The engraved names, the wreaths, the photographs, the handwritten notes from children. The objects Victor had considered obstacles now became visible again. A reporter approached Evelyn. Mrs. Brooks, do you believe Mr. Langford should lose his foundation? Evelyn considered the question. No, Victor looked surprised. She continued. I believe he should lose the belief that generosity makes him more important than the people he claims to serve. The reporter glanced toward Victor. Do you forgive him? Evelyn rested both hands on her cane. Forgiveness is not permission to avoid consequences. A sincere apology begins with accepting the cost of what you have done. Victor lowered his head. For the first time, he did not attempt to defend himself. Colonel Hayes addressed the production team. Anyone who refused to disturb the memorial today will be paid in full. The young assistant who had surrendered his badge looked up. Victor turned toward him. The assistant seemed prepared for another threat. Instead, Victor stared at the badge resting on the equipment case. After several seconds, he spoke. "You are not fired." The young man remained cautious. Victor continued. "You followed your conscience when I did not." Their admission surprised everyone nearby. Their assistant picked up the badge but did not put it back on. "Thank you, sir," Victor nodded. Then the young man added, "But I think I need to decide whether I still want the job." Victor had no answer. Their assistant walked away. It was another consequence no contract could repair. Director Pierce invited the veterans and military families to enter the auditorium first. The crowd naturally formed two long lines on either side of the memorial walkway. Evelyn stood at the beginning of the path. Marcus offered his arm. She accepted. Together, they walked between the rows of veterans. As they passed, each person stood at attention. Some saluted. Others placed a hand over their heart. No one had planned an honor corridor. It formed because everyone understood what Evelyn represented. A wife who had waited. A sister who had mourned. A grandmother still keeping promises for men who had been gone for decades. Victor stood outside the corridor. He watched Marcus guide Evelyn toward the museum entrance. For years, Victor had paid to have his name displayed at important events. That morning, his name had been removed from every banner. Yet Evelyn, who had asked for nothing, received the respect of the entire plaza. Victor finally understood why. Recognition could be purchased. Honor could not. The official ceremony began nearly an hour late. No one complained. The stage had been rebuilt inside the auditorium. It was smaller than Victor had planned. There were fewer lights. No giant screens displaying corporate logos. No luxury seating reserved for executives. Instead, the first rows were given to Gold Star families, wounded veterans, military nurses, and children whose parents were serving overseas. Marcus stood at the side of the auditorium. He was not scheduled to speak. He preferred it that way. His duty had never required applause. But halfway through the ceremony, Director Pierce walked to the microphone. "Before we continue, there is someone whose actions reminded us why this institution exists." Marcus immediately knew what was coming. He remained still. Director Pierce looked toward him. "Sergeant Marcus Ellison, please join us." The audience rose before Marcus moved. Applause filled the auditorium. Marcus walked to the stage with the same measured steps he used during every military ceremony. When he reached the podium, their applause continued. He waited silently until it faded. Director Pierce offered him the microphone. Marcus hesitated. Then he looked toward Evelyn. She sat in the front row, holding the journal against her chest. Marcus began. I was asked to protect a memorial today. That is part of my duty. I do not believe fulfilling a duty makes someone extraordinary. The room became quiet. But this morning, I learned that duty can begin long before we understand it. He looked toward the photograph Director Pierce had placed on the podium. My father came home from war because Captain Thomas Brooks refused to leave him behind. Because Captain Brooks carried my father to safety, my father lived long enough to raise a family. He taught me discipline. He taught me gratitude. And he taught me that respect is measured by what we protect when protecting it becomes inconvenient. Evelyn wiped her eyes. Marcus continued. I believed I was defending a flag, a medal, and a journal. I now understand that I was defending the man who gave my family its future. Several veterans lowered their heads. Marcus turned toward Evelyn. Mrs. Brooks, my family owes yours more than we can ever repay. Evelyn slowly stood. Marcus stepped away from the podium and helped her onto the stage. She carried the leather journal with her. When she reached the microphone, she looked toward Marcus. Your father once told me he spent the rest of his life wondering how to repay Thomas. Marcus listened closely. I told him there was nothing to repay. Thomas did not save him because he expected a debt. He saved him because no soldier should be abandoned. She opened the journal. Today you did the same thing. Marcus shook his head gently. I protected objects. No, Evelyn said. You protected memory when everyone else was being told to move on. She removed the photograph of Thomas and Marcus's father. Then she handed the journal to Marcus. He immediately stepped back. Madam, I can't accept this. You can. This belonged to your husband. It still does. She placed it in his gloved hands. But I am 76 years old. My grandson is overseas. And there should be someone else who understands what these pages mean. Marcus stared at the journal. I will protect it. Evelyn smiled. I know. She then handed him the Purple Heart. Marcus shook his head again. The medal belongs with your family. It will stay with my family. She closed his fingers gently around it. Today you became part of that family. The auditorium rose once more. This time the applause was not loud at first. It began with the veterans, then military families, then museum staff. Soon everyone was standing. Marcus held the journal and the medal against his chest. His composure finally broke. A single tear moved down his cheek. He did not wipe it away. There was no shame in it. The emotion did not weaken the uniform. It revealed the man inside it. At the back of the auditorium, Victor stood alone. He had been offered a front row seat before the confrontation. Now he had chosen the final row. He watched Marcus and Evelyn embrace. He watched families respond to a story that required no branding, no celebrity host, and no expensive stage. Then he understood something else. The ceremony had become more powerful after his influence was removed. Not because money had no value, but because money had been allowed to serve the message instead of replacing it. When their applause ended, Victor quietly left the auditorium. Outside, the corporate banners were stacked beside a service truck. His portrait lay face down on top of them. Victor stared at it for several moments. Then he removed his jacket. He rolled up his sleeves. And without calling an assistant, he began helping the workers load their equipment. The young assistant, who had refused his order, noticed him. Victor looked at the man. "I owe you more than your job back." The assistant said nothing. Victor lifted one end of a heavy equipment case. After a moment, the young man lifted the other. They carried it toward the truck together. It was not redemption. Not yet. But it was the first honest action Victor had taken all day. 3 months later, the museum board completed its review. The Langford Foundation lost its exclusive sponsorship agreement. Victor resigned as chairman. He also issued a public apology and transferred control of the foundation to an independent board made up of veterans, military spouses, nurses, and Gold Star family representatives. Some people believed he acted only to repair his reputation. Others believed the experience had truly changed him. Marcus never tried to decide which was true. Redemption was not proven by a statement. It was proven by what someone chose to do after the cameras disappeared. Evelyn continued visiting the memorial every July. But she no longer came alone. Marcus accompanied her whenever his duties allowed. Sometimes they spoke about Thomas. Sometimes about Marcus's father. Sometimes they simply sat beside the bronze wall in silence. Her grandson eventually returned safely from deployment. On his first morning home, Evelyn brought him directly to the memorial. She introduced him to Marcus as family. The journal remained in Marcus's care. The Purple Heart was displayed inside a protected case beside a new plaque honoring Captain Thomas Brooks and the soldiers he had saved. At the bottom of the plaque were the words he had written decades earlier: "A soldier is never truly gone while someone still protects the promise he died keeping." Visitors often stopped to read that line. Most never learned about the confrontation that had taken place in the plaza. They did not know about the billionaire, the cameras, the banners, or the guard who refused to step aside. Marcus preferred it that way, because the story was never supposed to be about him. It was about a truth too many people forget. A memorial is not valuable because of the stone used to build it. A flag is not sacred because of the cloth from which it was made. A medal is not meaningful because of the metal stamped into its shape. Their value comes from the lives, promises, and sacrifices they represent. Those things cannot be purchased. They cannot be optimized. And they should never be moved simply because honoring them has become inconvenient. Because convenience lasts for a moment. But honor must be protected forever.